Welcome to the No Show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
I'm Tim Wade.
And my name is Joe Augustin, and welcome to the show that tries to make sense of the world in just barely under 2 hours. Okay, maybe 3 hours. I don't know.
No.
So before we get to our guests and the usual stuff, this is what I'm going to start off with, because we want this channel to grow a little bit, right? So if you're especially joining us on YouTube and you may like what we're going to talk about, you're not sure yet, take a chance on us. Click like, click subscribe, and if along the way you change your mind, just take it back. But I think you'll find what we're talking about to be useful. The idea is, we can talk about anything that we're probably going to talk about things that you haven't thought about recently, because only certain things have been in the news, other things have not. I don't know. We may agree, we may disagree. We also try to have with us a guest every time to be a third or fourth perspective whenever we can. And this week is someone who is quite well known to some of you and to some
Legendary,
others.
I think is the word.
Well, this is the thing. It's quite across the board. If you're a big fan of football, the EPL, you know him. If you don't know football that well, you might not. But there you go. Our guest this week is John Dykes. In his former life, John became Asia's best-known sports anchor through his work with ESPN's Star Sports and Premier League productions, where he covered global events from the Academy Awards to World Cups. And he's worked alongside leaders in showbiz, sport, industry, learning, and all that kind of stuff, and learning what it takes to excel at the top. Today, he is a host, keynote speaker, and corporate coach, helping teams and leaders ace presentations, perfect their pitches, and perform at their very best. We're looking forward to hearing what he has to say. John, we'll ask you to share some more about yourself and what you do. What have you missed out there in the introduction?
Well, first of all, thanks very much for that introduction. Lovely to see you guys. Andrea, Tim, Joe, good to be here. You know, it's really interesting. I spent 30 years of my life appearing on screen every single day, every single working day for many, many hours. But I don't do it very often these days, as you can tell from my sort of, makeshift, here I am at home background and general sort of lack of polish. But it's quite fun every now and then. I pop up on the occasional podcast. Generally speaking, it's people who want to talk to me about the old days of sports television. And you touched on it a bit there, but you also threw in Academy Awards, and it reminds me of my age. I'm someone who was a journalist who then worked on TV in Hong Kong, working on entertainment TV, which saw me interview celebrities, travel to LA, do all sorts of crazy stuff like that, lifestyle stuff really. And then I got into sport, and then I was lucky enough to just ride the wave with cable TV, which took us into ESPN Star. Then I was hired by the Premier League. I had 7 years in England with them before I came back to Singapore with Fox. And now I, as you said, have sort of transitioned away from doing mainstream TV, mainly because there are no regional broadcasters here anymore. And I do broadcast work, and I do commentary, and I do sport. But I'm finding an interesting business growing around going into companies and teaching them to speak. And a lot of people are in that space, but I do it from a kind of a broadcast perspective. But also learnings from elite level sport, when you've interviewed superstars and when you've rubbed shoulders with the great coaches and the great players, some of the things rub off on you. And I've found that they're quite applicable in the corporate space and a number of spaces. So that's sort of where I am right now.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, Tim, I reckon we've got to up our game today. What do you think? We've got two experienced people now.
I know. I was thinking when Joe was doing the introduction, he said anything we missed, and he did miss the "when I grow up, I want to be John Dykes" part.
Said who?
Said me. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Tim. I love that.
Well, the thing about John is, in preparing for this, he was kind of hedging himself, saying that he doesn't get too involved with all the news and stuff like that, and he was concerned about that. And this is what I like about this show. The show isn't about necessarily the how well informed you are, but it's more about how connected you are with your heart and with your thinking to the stories and the people that you hear about. So, John, you don't have to worry about it at all. And I was thinking about several ways to look at it, and I was thinking maybe we could frame some of these things in questions of the offside rule. I'm not sure if that is a terrible idea, but
Well, don't go there. That's quite a divisive issue. But then again, I suppose it's maybe an appropriate metaphor for what you guys do. But no, I know what you guys do. I love the way you do it. And just to qualify what you explained a bit earlier on, for one reason or another, even though I've been around journalism and the media all my career, I've just never really been a journalist in that traditional sense. And that, I've been someone who's reported on sport, or I've covered lifestyle, and I love people, and I love people's stories, and I love lifestyle content, and I love entertainment. And I've just found that I was never really interested in the political side of things, in exposing things, exploring things, investigating things, in particularly taking some kind of a stance on anything. For me, it was always much more to do with the way people, as you say, people's hearts and people's reactions. So I'm looking forward to hearing you explain some of the things that I only really tangentially I'm aware of. I don't have a regular news watching habit. I don't follow current affairs. I don't really consume podcasts and such, but I'm aware of things, and one way or another it kind of filters through to me. My wife might sort of say over breakfast, "Oh, look at that, didn't realize that was happening," or my daughter might, who's a bit more politically attuned, might sort of mention something that's going on. And what's always interesting for me is how I sort of react to it and how it affects me in terms of how I feel on a humanitarian level about certain things.
Yeah. It sounds like you're very relational. You're very one-to-one, one-to-few, and you're looking at what drives people, what motivates people, rather than political gamesmanship somewhere else.
Yeah. I think one of the motivators, Tim, for me has always been, and I saw it when I spent some time at university in England, I used to be a little bit freaked out by people who expended huge amounts of emotional energy and angst on things that, as far as I was concerned, they couldn't control.
Yeah,
they had no real influence over, and it just struck me as being an enormous waste of time. But it also happened that I effectively, from the age of 17, grew up as an adult in Hong Kong and then Singapore, where for one reason or another, of all the things you could prioritize in terms of life, family, career, whatever it might be, community, politics or being involved in politics or being particularly bothered about things like that, I never really let external influence me too much. I'd be far more interested in day-to-day engagements and just life.
Makes sense.
God, I'd save a lot of hours in my day if I was like that.
Yeah, so here I am. You got the guest from hell.
No, not at all. No, I always say people who don't pay attention to the news are as important to this conversation as those who are, because the tangential thing it matters. It's there is news filtering through all the time, and it's coming through in different ways and different platforms, and it's impacting us all in different ways. So I think it's an important perspective. That's why when we look for people to come and join the show, it's not about someone who necessarily is all over it. Sometimes we get guests like that, and that's great. But I actually enjoyed the other side as well. So it's good.
Great. Thanks for making me feel welcome.
No, you are. And you might not even have an answer to this, or you might, and there's no right or wrong. But we've been starting the show off this year since Trump was elected with the biggest story that caught your attention, or the biggest shock or surprise. Who wants to go first?
Joe does.
Well, I decided to stay up and watch the keynote for the NVIDIA event. Just basically, with the CEO talking about the new developments in AI, and it is just mind-boggling. It's just amazing ideas and concepts that are not. He wasn't even just saying this is what we'll be doing. It's sort of like explaining what's being done, right? So I'm very much. I think the world that everyone's been worrying about, thinking it's still out there, it's still not coming, whatever it is, it's here, and it's been sitting in your backyard for a while, and it's going to affect a lot of people in ways people just can't imagine immediately. It's just I think people are holding on to some very old ideas of what AI can and can't do. And it's just simply not true anymore. It's so one of the things that's been going around is this robot that appeared on stage with him, and basically it was an autonomous AI robot. It was making decisions and acting as it should and whatever it is.
Did it look like the Terminator?
No, it was cute. It was kind of Star Wars cute, right? That sort of character. So it could understand the instructions, Yeah, no, Skynet's a bit far away. Although I think Elon Musk made comments that it's about 5 to 10 years out,
Oh, dear.
which doesn't reassure anyone. But as far as the way AI is being developed and the way chips are being compressed and how NVIDIA is no longer a chips company, it actually is a computer company. It's making computers more and more compact and able to do things. And I mean, they were looking at the future as well. So if you think it's amazing now, one of the ideas that really boggled me was the idea that whenever nowadays in a factory, there are two factories. The factory of the future has two factories. There's the factory that actually produces the stuff, and then there is an AI factory that produces the simulation data that the factory will use in its development of the actual products. So it's really quite an incredible time to be alive. It's one of those, the title of today's show, or the theme, is a fork in the road, right? We're really kind of sitting at the edge of that right now, because where AI can go, if it's used well, it will make such a huge difference to the world. And the interesting thing is, in maybe 5 to 10 years time, when quantum computing comes online as well, everything we know today might even be out of date. I mean, it will definitely be out of date, but it could be so out of date, But for now, yeah, it's just very exciting times.
If we're still around in 10 years' time, right? So one of the things that, because I've been in the tech industry most of my life, and I'd always sort of sit there and look at the social implications. So when they're presenting the solutions, are they also talking about the social implications, like what's going to happen to all the human beings when there's no jobs type conversations? Any of that stuff coming up? I'd love to hear it just once. I'd love to hear it coming up.
Well, not in that particular moment. It wasn't brought up. I mean, but I really do have this advice that I've come up with myself with, which is essentially, if you're trying to solve the problem the old way with a new situation, with a new problem, there is no real solution. As in, like, you cannot make the computer less capable than it is right now, right? I mean, for all the displacement that's going to happen, it's like saying that that some kids are coming online who are going to be better at your job, and you go like, we got to try and stop these kids. You really have to kind of figure out what the plan is, either now or ahead of time. And it's about changing your plans based on what you're going to be able to do, right? So most people haven't come across the new AI Manus in real life, MANUS. This is not to do with the NVIDIA thing, but this was a release some time ago, a couple of weeks ago now, which is it's an autonomous AI agent. And what's truly incredible about it is you can pose it a problem, and it goes out using the internet to learn what it needs to know to solve the problem. So you can ask it a very open-ended question, and it'll go out and figure out all the different things it has to, and then come up with a solution that is better than most assistants, that you could get in real life. So that is still in private beta right now, as in, like, you've got to wait for one of these codes to come when you can really fully try it out. But for all the videos I've seen of it being demonstrated, it's just remarkable.
I think, Andrea, with the NVIDIA presentation, though, I mean, the guy's presenting to get people excited about his company. He's not presenting about the human element that his company may impact, and he's looking at share price increases and short-term, quarterly profits and things like that.
I'll give you an example. I had the head of one of the top analyst firms in the world when I was charge of analyst relations at Microsoft, right? And they were talking about big data and what it was going to do, and it was going to help the police. It was going to do that for civic society. But big data, no one even talks about it anymore, right? But it was a big thing back like 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And I said to him, so let's look at India, right? Which employs a lot of police people, male and females, right? If you bring a technology like that in, what happens to those jobs? Because those jobs are important to those communities and those people and their families and all that sort of stuff. I don't know. I think it's part of the revolution that we need to start seeing Like, it's not just about your company and you're going to make all this money. It's going to be about, this is what we can do. This is why it's good. Like Joe talking about this Manus, AI Manus, right? So intelligence has been dropping off since basically books were first published. So intelligence has been dropping off, right? But now we're seeing a massive decrease in intelligence. So now we don't even have to go out there and work out our own solutions to our own challenges. AI is going to do it for us. What does that mean for us? Like us? Well, what do we do if we don't even have to think?
I'm gonna jump in there if that's okay, because I think, before we go too far down this one, I think Andrea is right to bring up social implications, and I know everyone's done the what's going to happen to our jobs thing, but I think it's worth looking at. There are two things that have been on my mind about this recently. Just last night I was chatting with a couple of friends. We're all about the same age. One of them's very happily and very financially stably retired. The rest of us are still sort of finding our way in life, and we were talking about what jobs exist for our kids, and at various ages. We've got kids who are either graduating or already in the workforce, and we kept going through different career paths and saying, well, that's probably not a safe bet anymore. And we've all had this conversation before about AI proofing and where things go, but that's one area. But the other thing that I think is very important is, you're right, Joe, and you're right, Tim. It's a presentation. It's aimed at shareholders. It's a business thing. But social implications have to be considered, because one topic that I think we're going to get onto later on is something that I've been very focused on lately, which is the responsibility that the new technology, particularly when it comes to streaming and social media, has to take. Because what I find is I'm seeing things happening in the broadcast, what traditionally was called the broadcast space. And I'm seeing things happening in terms of the content that's available to us and whether it's any good or not. And whenever we have the discussion about, oh, it's not as good as it used to be, or this is pretty substandard, or this is extremely polarized and very inflammatory or divisive content, the tech parties just wash their hands immediately. Oh, well, I mean, all we do is we just supply the tech. What happens to it is up to you guys.
We make guns,
but
we don't shoot
I just have a bit of an issue with
that.
Yeah,
exactly.
I have it both ways,
Yeah. Anyway, Joe, sorry, I wasn't hijacking you. I mean, I've got other concerns with AI from an environmental perspective, but I do think it's time. Like, if the people behind this technology who are pushing it forward, I think it's time for a bit of responsibility and just paint the picture. What does it look like? If there's going to be no jobs, that's fine. If it can do everything, then what's left for us? And if there's all the human capital's been taken out, so all the profits should go back into society so people can have lives. Like the original that movie Her, where Scarlett Johansson, that's our future, right? But so the income needs to come from somewhere. So obviously it's got to come from these companies that are making all this money, right? Rather than trillionaires ever existing on this planet. So I don't know. It's
well, the other thing as well is I think margaritas might have been involved last night. So we kind of worked our way through, as you do, through the conversation. And, we went down that path, and then we worked towards, well, if this is the case, where do we go? And we went exactly where you were suggesting, Andrea. And at the end of it, one of the guys made a really good point. He said, if we just accept that there is a finite amount of growth that this planet is capable of, and then we work within those parameters, and then we say, well, how do we make the most? This is all we're going to have, and this is all we will ever be able to sustain. So how do we make the most of that, and how do we then, ensure that we can live in a way that is worth living?
You'll have to invite us to the next dinner party.
That's a good one.
Exactly.
Margaritas.
No, I don't. No, I don't. Tim, anything that's gotten your attention?
I think the one that's been coming in front of me most has been the astronauts coming back, and the polarizing debate about whether or not they were rescued or whether it was a planned everything, and then whether Elon's a superhero for flying up there in his cape to get them, or whether it's just all a bit of a PR stunt. Well, it was a planned thing that's been turned into a PR stunt because Elon's getting some bad press at the moment with all his other cuts and slashes. So that one's been coming across, and of course they've been talking about what space has been doing to people because they've been up there so long. And there's some interest in it from that perspective, from the human element, about what it does to us, in space and then coming back to Earth a little bit, and how people are taller but their bones are brittler and all of that sort of stuff we already knew, but it's been contextualized to the fact that some people are coming back from 200 and whatever it is days up in space.
Apparently you shrink back up over time, right?
Yeah, it's just the no gravity, so your bones, your spine extends a little bit.
Well, that's good, isn't it?
We do it.
I think
we do it every day. Actually, you start your morning off about a cm or two taller than you end the evening usually.
Yeah, one guy came back taller, significantly taller, but the gravity hurts your back when you're back.
Yeah.
So they need to be cotton wooled a little bit as they reintegrate, I suppose, or reacclimatize to Earth. But yeah,
there are a lot of rubber bands that are used in space or should be used in space. I think scientists are just as guilty as I am of not going to the gym.
Well, they actually have. So I was in India, and one of the Russian astronauts was speaking at the conference I was speaking at. And so we got to chat, but his presentation was also about the effects of and what they have to do in space. And then some of these articles that have been coming in front of me as well were about how they've got all these treadmill equipment and everything else up there. And it's just, they have to weight themselves to it to try and get their muscles moving, because a lot of the muscles will atrophy because they're not being used because they're just floating about. So they weight themselves down, they tie themselves to their bed so that they can sort of try and get the normalized sleep. And it's a fascinating story that he had, and quite incredible, really. But yeah, them coming back is, I mean, it's a good news story where there's a lot of bad press going on in the US, and they needed that. So I guess I was getting the war of words of who's claiming what, particularly with that one. But it's nice. It's nice. I love anything to do with space. I'm a bit of a Star Trek fan, and any sci-fi, anything. But so space kind of makes that real or possible, and it's a future way beyond the AI future that we're looking at right now. But but it's what's really interesting about it is that we invent. Yeah, a friend of mine. Let me just jump a bit. There was a guy at school that I went to in boarding school in Australia who wrote a book 10 years after boarding school where it was a sci-fi book. He was a sci-fi fan, and there was this huge celebration as Earth sent off this fellow in cryogenic chamber in a spaceship to get to this planet, this distant planet, and he had arrived there in 50 years or something or other. And so he set off, and he was sailing over there in 50 years. But in that 50 years, the technology got so good that they could get there much faster. So they all went there, set everything up. By the time he actually got there, he wasn't the first at all. And then it was a sort of a bit of a Buck Rogers sort of story about him sort of arriving late and having to sort of deal with all of that. But quite an interesting thought is that whatever we send out there, we could probably send something faster later. But we still need to make these baby steps now. And when we talk about fork in the road as a theme, oftentimes that road is going over a mountain or a hilltop, and we can't really see what's on the other side. And the only way to get there, which I think is possibly where we may be playing a little bit, is to send somebody to the top of the hill and to have a look over and see what are the different directions that our decision today may take. And we have futurists that are doing a lot of those thinking, and we have considered people doing a lot of the thinking. And I guess what we're just saying in the conversation just now is that we want the CEOs of these companies to be involved in the thinking that has the human element involved, and not just the profitability and the enormous profitability that they can see. Because that is beyond the hill, there's a valley and there's another hill. And that hill, we can see the profits. But what's in the valley is what we kind of need to be paying attention to. Who's missing out, who's losing out, who's suffering.
That's very poetic. I'd like there to be a happy ending. I mean, I'm a sucker for the sci-fi films. Absolutely love them. I tend to go for the tech. But along the way, I noticed that things tend to end horribly, usually with some kind of, alien extinction event or something like that. So, I'm just wondering when the time is going to come when, as you say, somebody might sort of say, well, let's try and deliver a happy ending. Maybe it would flop in the box office.
Well, if I could just chime in on behalf of technology, I was explaining to my daughter was talking about AI as a problem for the environment, and I went, but there's something that is happening with AI is that it's not a problem that they go like, this is the problem, deal with it. It actually is a problem that they are trying to deal with, right? So they're compacting everything, making things lighter in terms of energy as well, and figuring out different ways to create the energy. I know it doesn't sound like a great thing to throw on a nuclear anything to anything, but it's one of the ways that they're looking at doing that. And again, this is about using old measurements for new technologies. I mean, the new kind of nuclear that Bill Gates is working on is completely different from the nuclear that you're probably thinking about when someone says nuclear, right? And also in terms of the architecture of these devices and all the stuff that creates the output, it is being reduced. And the interesting thing about it is that it itself is being applied to making it better, as in like the AI is set on the task of solving all kinds of things. So they had this incredible thing where they talked about all the different libraries that they have for different kinds of problems and solutions, and how the models are set up so that the AIs can perform at the highest level to try and solve those problems. Yeah. So it's one of those things. It's a pain along the way. So it's the difficult math that people don't want to do. It's the kind of thing that people say when someone says to you, like, for instance, we shouldn't do EVs, they're bad for the environment. You should know, you should figure out the math so you know that in the end, yeah, it might be bad up front in terms of all the costs it kicks up in the manufacturing of these EVs, but in terms of lifetime detriment to the environment and where it directs the curve, it has some kind of net positive. You know, I mean, look, ideally we don't do that.
I have to disagree,
Joe. Yeah, I know.
It takes an EV 7 years of its life to counter out the emissions of its creation. But EVs ultimately are better than fossil fuel cars, no question about it. But the other side of EVs is the largest percentage of microplastics in our oceans are from car tires, and EVs are notoriously heavy, so they actually spray off more of that microplastics than traditional cars. So from that perspective, and then there's reports that the amount of microplastics in the environment are stopping photosynthesis, and crops losing like sort of 15 to 20% of their capacity to produce food, and we're also losing 20, 50, 100% capacity to produce food because of other extreme weather events. So, I mean, EVs are definitely a solution for individual mobile sort of mobility. The idea that we can all have one is the thing that we need to be thinking about addressing. That's not, we need first responders, educators, nurses, doctors, people like that. They should be able to drive because that's what they need for their job. But the rest of us should be catching public transport because that's what we need. And we need to rip up our roads so we can reduce the urban heat island effect. So it's always about putting all the different pieces together, right? And that's, I think, Tim, you were talking about it, the ability to look ahead into the future. So there was in January, Sam Harris released a sort of a conversation that him and Elon Musk had during the pandemic. Do you guys remember that? Where they had a bet when 30,000 people would be infected or 300,000 people would be infected with COVID. And Elon Musk was on the low end, Sam Harris was on the high end. It wasn't until there were that many deaths, and I think it was only 30,000, Sam Harris went back to him when it hit the deaths, not the infections, and that's when they fell out and haven't spoken again since, right?
Because he wanted his money.
Yeah, it wasn't a big bet. It was two mates having a bit of a, sort of thing. And I'm looking at the situation that's going on in the US, and he's in tears about Tesla and all that sort of stuff. And I'm like, how is it possible that he didn't understand that was a possible repercussion for his actions? So to me, all I'm seeing from Elon Musk right now is not a visionary thinker, even though everyone thinks he's a visionary thinker. We're talking about going to Mars, right? The physical impacts on the human body of going into space for 120 days, including like organs fail earlier. Also, there's all sorts of issues around it, right? We're so far away being able to go to another planet and inhabit another planet while destroying this planet. And I don't know, if you look at, you've got someone, Donald Trump's nearly 80, right? Making decisions about the future of our planet. He's going to be dead, Why is he even, I don't think anyone over 60 should be allowed to be in politics anymore because anyone over 60 is not going to suffer the consequences of the decisions that they make, right? But the vision, the long-term, big picture thinking, there's not a lot of it going on if you actually pay attention to the decisions being made and the statements or just the emotional responses to this whole Tesla thing. Of course the share price was going to go down. Like, of course people didn't want, after a Nazi salute, of course people weren't going to be proud of driving around in a Tesla. Like, how could you possibly think that was a good idea? It's bizarre.
I mean, I do think that I mean, I have to agree with you. That was naive to think that there was going to be no consequence. But I do think that EV, for example, when we're talking about the EVs are, more microplastics because they're heavier and everything else. It's sort of the beginning of their technology. They're going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, more and more efficient, batteries better, cars lighter, ways and solutions are going to come in. It's the guy floating in space at the moment. It's the heavy one. The tech will get better.
But it's the existing technologies that's already created the problem.
Well, I think actually the challenge is our disposable mindset, that we can just dispose of the thing that we have to get the latest one because it's more, carbon efficient when they made it. But this is zero because I've already bought it. It's I don't need to throw the thing away to buy the new one. So we do have a consumer mindset where we're buying into I need the next thing. Whereas that car that may have, cost the environment to make the thing is now carbon neutral because it's secondhand. I mean, other than what it's emitting.
Only after 7 years.
It's sure, but I mean, you know what I mean? So it's like,
I mean,
I think part of the problem is we're just continuing to consume and to buy and to dispose and to waste and to do all of that sort of stuff. I think the technology needs to invest and kind of get over that hump of being inefficient at the beginning, because as they learn, they're going to get better. I mean,
how much space have we got for humps anymore, though? Like when you look at the state of the planet, right?
John, I think
all right, John.
Just a little bit on this. If you look at China, if you look at what's happening in China and Chinese cities where the transformation to EVs is more or less complete, you get to see what the other side of it looks like. That they're over the hump, and 7 years when you've got 5 years of clean air in the meantime, it's not a bad deal.
But don't forget, when we clean up the air, we have other implications like more heating. The Pacific Ocean. It's like, but looking at the whole story, right? John, any thoughts?
It's interesting what you said there, Joe, about China. I mean, isn't typically the air pollution there down to in industry rather than vehicles in China?
Well, lots of cities and lots of areas so you have an industrial area, but you also have city areas and stuff like that. So if you're going to get all the logistics around the city done without any kind of emissions from the vehicles, that makes a difference.
Yeah. I drive here, and I was driving the other day, and I pulled alongside a guy in a Tesla, and he had a sticker that said, "I bought this before Elon went crazy." And I was wondering what that was all about. Thanks for explaining that to me there. But I don't know. Do you guys own an EV?
No,
well, I mean, look,
we've got four.
I've often said that
bicycles.
if I ever get back into owning a car, it'll be an EV, and I'll pay cash for it. But one of the things I loved about what I heard about in the US is that there's a rise in the number of Audis on the road. And the Audis are actually Teslas, which have had the badges changed to Audi.
There's a lot of that going on.
I want to.
A lot of people are doing it. All right, I want to talk about some other sort of news things that have caught my attention briefly. So, big concern for me, women and minorities are being basically wiped from US history, including Indigenous communities. And these are war heroes, scientists, researchers, like people who really, really deserve to be remembered for their contribution to society. there's a lot of people being pulled by ICE in the US, and it's not necessarily the people that we would expect. We've heard of Brits, Germans. There was a Canadian that was put into detention for a couple of weeks. And because she was put in detention and has been released, she's written a story about it. And it's really interesting to hear the story of the other people in detention who we don't hear their stories, you know, because no one's paying attention to them. So it's at this time, because what I share on social media, I actually think it would put me at risk. The whole Venezuelan gangs being moved to El Salvador is something that I find incredibly upsetting. We're hearing more and more stories about that. I don't know if you've ever seen those prisons and understand the history of why they've been set up. But if you're basically just a decent human being who's been living a decent life and somehow got caught up in that, and you've ended up in one of those prisons, your life is a nightmare. And there's a lot of other horrible stories out there, but the one that really made me go, oh, for God's sake, what's going on here is in the US now, segregated facilities, whites-only toilets, whites-only drinking fountains, that sort of stuff that should be in history, are no longer explicitly banned in government contracts. So you got to ask yourself the question, will we see segregation come back? It wouldn't surprise me if it comes back in some places. But if you're missing it, there is a massive white supremacy push going on in the US and in other far-right movements around the world. And it's predominantly for white men. You know, the ultra white male should rule the world, which is one of Elon Musk's statements like 12 months ago. This concerns me. It sickens me. And, you know, we've got two white men here. How do you guys feel about it? Because you're not one of them. You're not an ultra high status white male.
I was a white male before the US went crazy.
What was that?
I was a white male before the US went crazy.
Yeah, yep. That's right. Yeah. I'm a legacy white male. Is that a bad thing? No, I mean, I didn't know any of those things. And I'm blessed that I've grown up in Asia, and everything I've ever done is, as far as I can see, been down to meritocracy, and I'm a big believer in that one. I find it limiting and frustrating when people apply any kind of rules along those lines. And I've brought my girls up, my two daughters, to basically just not see anything along racial lines in any way whatsoever. So no, it's not something I pay a great deal of attention to. If it does come anywhere near my life, I just move away from it. You know, if I feel that for any reason hiring policies or any other things are done for anything other than meritocratic reasons, then I try and move away from that if I can.
Like, yeah. I mean, and actually, John and I have something similar. We've grown up in Asia, so maybe the dynamic is a bit different, or the mindset is different when you're, weirdly enough, the minority in this part of the world. But and this part of the world is sort of built on everybody working together. So
so I think a lot of the policies are based on countries that have a very different racial dynamic. And as a result, it's not necessarily appropriate to apply them to places that maybe have organically evolved in a different way.
Yeah, but America's conversation is extraordinarily divisively and probably purposely divisively racist, or at least with racial discrimination, and race being just this constant conversation. And I remember it was Morgan Freeman who he was in an interview, and some person was asking him about how he felt being a black man and about racism and everything else. And he said, stop talking about it. I said, the problem is we keep talking about it. It's like, if you stop talking about it, we can be people. He said, I'm a man. You know, why do I have to be described as a black man? And if we keep the labeling and we keep the divisiveness and keep talking about the boundaries or the difference or whatever it is. Now, there's another aspect, of course, and that is to sort of come to a reckoning about the past and to understand that past. But I think imprison yourself in the past, I think that's where people can get stuck with regards to growth, moving forward, reconciliation, and moving together as a unified unit of a nation. Then if they're constantly talking about it, it's like it's politicized. It's a politicized weapon of mass distraction.
So the irony is, the irony is that point of view, right, is actually what is embodied in this little story. So the interesting thing about this is it's a result of the moving away from DEI language, right? All that stuff. So because of that, all these references to race and what have you is all been removed. So the result is we're in a situation right now where basically nothing has been said explicitly, as in, like, we it no longer says you have to, you can't do this, you can't do that, that sort of thing.
Sorry,
right?
guys.
So that's the it's kind of the result of it, right? So this is actually not talking about it. This is where you've actually gone back to McDonald's and says you don't need to put a sign on your apple pie that says warning hot, right? Contents may be hot, coffee may be hot, whatever it is. That's what the contract, which names things specifically, that's what it actually is trying to do. It says all these things that you should do as a decent human being. These are the rules, so you have to act that way. So it's one of those things, right? We want it not to be a thing, but at the same time, when people don't do it, there seems to be a complaint about it. So I think it's the endless loop you get into when you keep talking about having to deal with it, right? Yeah, sorry.
But why remove women, people of color, indigenous people from the story of the country and the history of the country? Right? Why remove the history books?
Who's doing that? Sorry, I'm behind on this story.
The U.S. government, like all of. I mean, even one of the airplanes, which is called "Gay" in the name, and I think
the Enola Gay.
You mean the one that dropped the bomb?
Yeah,
Yep.
that's been removed because "Gay's" in the name.
Orchestral maneuvers in the dark.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, it's like the whole war on woke, right? And you just sort of sit back and you just sort of it's really difficult, I think, for most people to sort of understand that what's the word? It's not
overcorrecting,
revisionist.
No, well, definitely overcorrecting. No, it's like it's everything. It's like every single person that seems to come out and attack people for being pedophiles ends up being a pedophile themselves.
Yeah, it's just part of the
projection,
revisionism thing. Sorry, it's just the part of the revisionism thing that I remember reading in Britain a couple of years back about people pulling down statues or sculptures of people who might have been connected to slavery or something like that. So is this like, the thing is just completely, and some people are saying, well, if you're going to do this, we're now going to do that, because that would be quite worrying. I mean, it's crazy to think, isn't it, that we don't, it's crazy to think, isn't it, that we can't just accept and if there's one thing that I'm really sort of passionate about these days, it's the fact that we've moved into a world where context and nuance are completely absent. And whether it's the tech that's doing it, whether it's the politicians that are doing it, and I'll use a very, very simple and a very appropriate to me analogy. I find that in the sports space now, there is no longer any room for nuanced, balanced analysis or storytelling or discussion. You are encouraged to take a position. And even journalists who appear on sports coverage now are told you have to basically declare your allegiance to a specific team and build your brand around that so that you can provoke engagement. And that is absolutely, utterly anathema to me, having built whatever my legacy may have been in sports broadcasting around considering every angle, looking at it from different perspectives, bringing as much insight and context and nuance to the conversation as possible. That appears now, for one reason or another, in a flailing, disrupted industry to be no longer required. So that's just one tiny example. But I think it's part of a far broader concern I have, which is that we're not prepared to accept context and nuance, and removing parts of history. That's just insane, because whether for something to have happened in the past, whether it was good or bad in most people's opinion, you can't remove it because it's actually informed what we are today. That revisionism is one of the most fine things you do, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to agree. Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
No. So that's always the big challenge with this, right? It's the result of unintended. It's the law of unintended consequences, right? So I used to program code a long time ago, right? And so when you changed one bit of code, it changed the result elsewhere. We didn't expect it to happen as well. So nobody set out to remove the history of the Enola Gay, for instance, right? And that definitely wasn't the intention of it. But because it happened, it happened. I think Bill Maher's comment about this was really quite good. It said, like, wait till they find out every plane has a cockpit, right? So that's.
I think cock's still an acceptable word on the list of things. Words like women is not. It's like, yeah,
really.
Well, it's not just about stupid. It's not about. So when it comes to things like funding and the way they're looking for funding for science, for projects, or what have you, and all that. So anything that has stuff that's to do with gender, to do with sex differences, to do with that, it calls up a flag. So someone came up with a policy that's supposed to do something that wound up doing something else, and unfortunately, what happens is we're also jumping on it to celebrate that this is the gross error that's occurred, because we pretend that that's the result they wanted, or at least the people who are reporting on it pretend that that's the result they're looking for. There is nobody on that team, I think, who wants the Enola Gay not to be spoken about. There is nobody that wants his any health research about women not to be done as well. But it's the result of the policy that they enacted, right? So when you put that rule into place.
I don't know, Joe. I'm not as convinced of that as you. I'm really not.
Okay, I'll take it back. I won't say nobody, but I think the majority that we are painting the brush with, I don't think they all respond to the same thing. I think a lot of them are going like, no, this is not the intention of it. And even the people who are putting those actions into place, I'm pretty sure that's not what they want to create out of it. They just came out with this policy and say, okay, how are we going to do this? We're going to search through everything. We're going to put all these words. These are all the keywords. If it shows up, it's a problem. And then if you have a system that's automated on the other side, you have some software. It's gonna red flag some stuff. And then what happens when you have a game that's happening like that is people are going to try to resubmit things to pass the test. And then they're going to realize that this is how you pass this test, because this computer that's quite stupid, or this program that's quite stupid is looking out for all these things. So I have to withdraw it. And then you talk about it, and then the story comes out of it, and then we have all this emotional energy that says what they are trying to do is this, as opposed to, okay, so this is the result of that. So the irony is that we don't want to go through the science of it either, right? There is actually a science of enacting policy through policies, to words, processes, and what have you, and you get a result, and you look at it and you go like, okay, so this is the result. What do we do? How do we tweak? We're jumping on the result. We're jumping on that's begun to happen, and that began to happen, and what have you, and all that. And then we say you guys are horrible people because of that. Because there's something.
They've removed the names of white women, of women, black people, and Indigenous people from the list of Arlington Cemetery. That sounds like an intentional action, not a stupid decision with unintentional consequences.
This I agree with. I agree. I agree that is that is appalling, and is to lose that from our history and from the efforts that those people put in, and the people that they represent today. I think it's appalling. That's appalling.
Yeah.
But who's doing this? Who's doing this, and why?
It's the whole Doge, US.
It's the American
Trump.
I just like to make 3 comments on what we've been talking about recently, and one of them is about the statues, for example, being taken down a while back, and a little bit about the revisionist stuff that's happening now. But I think that what America's doing is I mean, that it just seems to be smokescreen politics, or where you create this turmoil over there so that you can get this other stuff done over here and pass it through legislation and nobody knows, and stuff gets sorted and settled while everybody's focusing on some names being removed from a cemetery, which itself is a provocative, intentionally divisive, and even if it isn't intended to be a smoke, it's just a horrible thing to do. I mean, it's whoever's doing that should be fired, removed, and not representing the people, because politicians are supposed to represent the people. You know, what happens in this country is harmony is the thing that is one of the priorities of the government, to try and keep a cohesion across multiple cultures, multiple religions, multiple peoples living together in this country. Whereas over in America, the political playbook seems to be create conflict. And John gave a great example with regards to broadcasting, where conflict sells newspapers, conflict sells. I mean, Roy Keane, as a person who gets fed up with stuff and says it like he hears it and is provocative and just shouts people down and will happily get into some argument and believes he's right, which is one main thing. And he makes a lot of sense when he says stuff. He's not always right, in my opinion, but he believes he's right. That stuff is the clip that everyone clicks on social media, which gives prominence, which gives audience viewership, which gives a lot of, so there's a lot of machinations at play here. But the thing I don't like about the revisionist history side, well, not even the revisionist versus applying today's cultural and moral and ethical values to a time in history where what we think today wasn't the cultural norm or mores of the time, and a statue was built about somebody. And should we be applying today's ethical thinking or moral thinking or whatever the thinking is, should we be applying today's cultural mindset to destroy a piece of history, to destroy it? Now, if you want to remove it from being in the middle of the city square because it's offending a whole bunch of people, go and put it in a museum and maybe explain the story about what the division is and the problem is and everything else. But I think to destroy it is, I don't think that's the right thing to be doing. And the thing is, if I had somebody impassioned sitting next to me going, yeah, but the reason is it offends us in this particular way, and we live in an offense culture that everyone's getting offended by everything, and then everyone has their own truth about everything. Well, if everyone has their own truth about everything, of course everybody's going to get offended by everything because it doesn't align with their own version of truth. And so in this sort of postmodern pluralistic mindset where everybody is their own king, then I think we've got a cultural problem to deal with, which I think if you put it all in a pan and boiled it down, it's an education problem. And I think if we keep ripping out our resources from education and educating people into history and educating people into group harmony and bringing kids together from multiple backgrounds and educating them together, like I was, like most multicultural countries are, then you're going to miss out on something, and you're going to end up with this ghetto-like world, which appears to be what America's heading towards. That's going to end up causing revisionist history to keep themselves in power.
Guys, could you explain this one to me? And I'm going to probably ask you to do this a lot, but in the Western political context, does this happen because of short-term changes of power from left to right, for example? Therefore, it's going to be a case of, well, you tore this down or you built this up, therefore we're going to tit for tat and go, we're going to do this, and then it becomes, I guess it becomes legislature, and I guess it comes into play. But then it might just turn out that in a few years' time that all happens the other way around. Is that part of that process, so that everything is now antagonistic and polarized?
I think somebody in Germany said, like, we have no problem in working out who the villains of our history are, and we don't have any statues of Hitler in our cities across the country, and there's no argument about that, right? Whereas the US seems to have always had this argument. You know, they'll have someone up in one of the southern cities who's, you know, famous as a slave owner, or, you know, on the other side of the Civil War, right? So I don't think you can ever compare any country with how they respond, because every country is different. The culture's different, and how they were formed were different. You know, their history contributes to it. But you know, we've got Christian nationalism is a big part of this story. Project 2025 is a big part of this story. And then you've got the whole tech bros and techno-fascism and all of this sort of stuff. So there's a lot of things going on. And that's the problem right now. People aren't grasping how big and complex this is. So we've got these three groups of people with vested interests, all the driving force behind Trump. And most people are paying attention to Trump, but to me, it's the groups behind. And people aren't understanding them, what their motivations are. They can't make sense of them. You know, there's a lot of criticism of the Democrats for not speaking up in the US right now. If I was a Democratic senator, I would probably say, you know, I think it's great. You know, I said a few weeks ago, Bernie wasn't really inspiring me. He's definitely moved into inspiring mode now. But if I was a Democrat, I'd say, all right, this is what you guys want. Well, this is what it is, to a point where you can pull it all back and contain it. Because there are a large percentage of people in America who think that it's on the right path right now. There are still. I mean, not everywhere, obviously, but there's still a large part of big percentage. And that worries the hell out of me, that, you know, because, you know, the individual loss, you know, of Medicare, Social Security, all that sort of stuff, that's going to impact older people. It's definitely going to impact people of color, you know, so the amount of suffering that's going to have to happen on the back of this, it's hard, but I try not to get emotionally connected to the domestic stuff. I'm always trying to sit back and look at it from an international impact perspective, because I can't get involved in the domestic issues in America, because they've got to sort their own, and it's big. So I want to move on, because we haven't even gotten to point 2 yet.
Welcome to hour 2 of this short program.
So I just want to quick war update, right? So obviously, the Israelis have bombed Gaza again. Very interestingly, the media did not represent this as them breaking the ceasefire. Their words were not that, which is interesting, because obviously if the Palestinians did it, it would definitely have been presented that way. Hundreds have been killed. There was over 400 killed, lots of kids. Then, of course, we've got the US attacking the Houthis, which sort of, you know, apparently Trump was going to be the peace president. And a lot of innocent people and children have been killed by that as well. And of course, we've had the negotiations in with Putin, between Trump and Putin. But one of the pieces that got my attention was Noah Rossman, and he writes in the National Review. I don't subscribe to that, so I only got a reference to it. But he sort of roasted Trump over his endless capacity to absorb humiliation by Putin, and, you know, it's very apparent. But what I want to go on to is the impact of US AID cuts. So Nicholas Kristof is an opinion writer for the New York Times. I've read one of his books. So I like what he does. And the title is "Musk said no one has died since aid was cut. That isn't true." So in the article, I don't know if you guys had a chance to read it, he talked to a whole bunch of people around, especially in the global south. And, you know, there's if you go up to the border of Thailand with Myanmar, there's like refugee camps sprinkled all the way across this border. And one of the people he spoke to, and I've been up to those areas, not into the refugee camps, but one of the people he spoke to, there were people who were getting kidney dialysis support. And if you've been living in extreme heat, one of the damages that can be done is to your kidneys. So kidney dialysis is going to be an urgent need as we move forward. And those people have dropped dead. In the Philippines, people have dropped dead. In Africa, people have already been dropping dead because they can't get access to the AIDS medication. And it was weeks when it didn't take that long. But I want to give you the numbers. Excuse me.
By the way, it's an extraordinary visual in that particular article.
Oh, it's fantastic.
That visual is amazing.
Yeah.
As you scroll through it, how many people are reliant on?
Yeah,
it's incredible the way that they've done
let's hope the Chinese step in, right? So these are numbers that when these amount of people will die. 1.65 million from HIV prevention and treatment, 500,000 from funding for vaccines, 550,000 for funding for food aid, 290,000, which is for funding for malaria prevention, which is something we all actively try to avoid, and 310,000 for cuts in funding for tuberculosis prevention. So at a minimum, it's 3.3 million people that will die in the next sort of 11 months because of the cuts, which is the very first and big aggressive thing that the US did. We've seen the courts say that they've got to stop it, they've got to turn it around and put this funding back in place in lots of different areas, but they've basically destroyed the organisation. So the fact that this can ever come back, it's going to take a lot of work. So I thought it was a really important article just to really highlight the real impact of the poorest people in the world who are relying on the US AID programs to survive. So big numbers, right?
Yeah, and there was a moment in the article where it goes, some of you may be thinking, this is very sad, but why is it our job to keep kids alive in poor countries? And I thought, it's great that it's asking that question. So, I mean, one of the answers to the question was about global political power, soft politics through aid, ensuring the US dollar is kept as the currency of choice globally, and also being able to puppeteer politics in those countries as well. And I could see where Trump just looks at the balance sheet and goes, we can keep this money. And yeah, right, Steve. We've moved though, Steve. We're doing better.
Three.
I think that I think there was, the thing is, I can understand the rhetoric about we want to pull back this aid. We want other countries around the world, Europe, Asia, wherever, to also be buying in and helping, and not just us footing the whole bill. I can understand that narrative. In fact, it's a very appealing narrative, but just cutting it, I think, is a very inhumane approach to making a point. I think this one has to be done with a lot more politics. It's got to be done at UN level. It's got to be done with a global care focus, rather than let's keep the money for ourselves. I think the way that they've done it is terrible.
It's also taking responsibility for the actions of the country, which have created a lot of the problems in the first place. The largest emitter of emissions historically is the US. So food aid to countries and regions that are suffering from severe droughts, which has been caused by the lifestyle of Americans. And by the way, it's good for your farmers because, and they're really proud of delivering that food to people who need it around the world. So it's just.
And actually, there was a lot of
totally ungodly if from a so-called Christian, and it's a Christian nationalist movement behind it, right? And
it isn't. It isn't. They're claiming that from a political perspective, from a vote perspective, but what they're doing, is red horns and pointy tails. So, yeah.
Well, the challenge with this is when you politicize it in the first place, right? Because it is. I mean, it has to be recognized first of all that its very creation was a political thing too. It was designed to help the U.S. in terms of its soft power in the world. So it is a political tool. And it also became a tool in the U.S. So if you're in the U.S., which it's often overlooked because when we comment from the outside, we don't We don't have the view of what's happening in the US with their homelessness and their own problems and the challenge that they have, the poor that they have, the displaced, and all these different things. And the politics of US aid, unfortunately, is that they took the worst of it and said, this is what your money is doing when it leaves the country. So it's going to do all these other things for other communities. And at the same time, they go like, well, we haven't solved the problems here. Now, it'd be great if that money did go and solve those problems here. But it's one of those things where you go like, well, we should continue doing all these things because it's a good thing to have. But you know what? If you haven't got your own house in order, I mean, this is just me understanding the perspective and why it's become what's become, right? It's something that I think most people in the U.S. didn't know about USAID. They didn't know what it was doing. They had no idea. Then it was Then it was brought up. It was politicized, and some stories were told about it. And now you have to ride the lie all the way to the train station, right? So if you bring up some extreme examples, why would the U.S. spend $100 million on condoms for Hamas, right? I mean that if you framed it and that caught on, and that's what people think it represents. Then you go like, why does this make sense? Why does it not make sense for me to say, no, let's cut that off and bring it home? So it's unfortunately it's the horror of turning something into a political thing. I mean, what brought it into existence in the first place, and all the great it did as well, is the same thing that it's causing the problems now. It's politics, right? You've turned it into an issue, and now you have to pay off on the promises.
I would be interested to know how much of the money that they think is going overseas is actually going to American manufacturers who are sending their stuff overseas. And actually they're cutting, and the farmers as well as the manufacturers that are sending stuff over, that they're actually hurting themselves from.
It's like Ukraine war, right? The majority of the money stays in the country and goes to the defense industry, which creates jobs and helps societies. It's not going overseas into Ukraine's pockets. John, thoughts?
Oh, well, I'm simultaneously opening my eyes, or you're opening my eyes, and I'm shaking my head. Look, Joe summed it up. I have two broad takes on this. I said earlier on, anything that politicizes what I consider to be basic humanitarian acts, I have no time for. And secondly, get your own house in order before you start affecting other countries for political gain of any kind. It's like going back to our discussion about playing race cards and what have you. There's an obvious argument to be made for all of those things that have happened in the past that shouldn't be revised. But the one thing I have a problem with is when people make political or even personal financial currency out of issues. And that's just my broad position on this as well. I mean, aid is something that has been politicized, and it's horrendous to think that something as innately humanitarian and beneficial and good and kind should be politicized. But that's part of my resistance to this whole business, and particularly when it comes to, it strikes me, back to the point I made earlier on, that these things, I always find myself hearing these stories and going, but why?
Yep.
Why? Is this a statement? So you're effectively playing with lives to make a statement.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and they are. And when Joe was saying, like taking care of their own, right? So they're not taking care of their own. They're making life harder for the poorest, and giving the richest tax cuts. So it's not a case of we're going to take this money back from doing this good in the world because we're going to take care of our own. They're not doing any. They're cutting funding for all of those good programs. Department of Education's on the desk today, right? And as someone who's been in the special needs system with a child and understanding how complicated and expensive it is, the US system was actually really good at supporting children with special needs. Now that's basically all gone. So I just think of all of the families across the US, and you got to think about a lot of the reasons for the special needs, and there's a lot of different reasons for it. There's genetic issues, but there's also the amount of forever chemicals and microplastics in the environment, the amount of the chemicals that people are eating in their food, which are finally starting to link to a lot of the the issues that children have today. So the food is making the children have behavioural issues, and the education system now will not be able to support that, which means the burden sits with the families. And if you're a single mum with a child who's got severe autism or severe ADHD, you're basically screwed. You have no life, you can't work. And, you know, Project 2025 is all about not taking care of the single mums. It's a key point, you know. So, yeah, it's, I don't know, maybe they're trying to cull, you know, from what I've been reading, just cull the people that don't add any value to society based on their definitions. I know that's a harsh thing to hear, but
no, you know, for me, it's not an intricate system that they've designed to cause to create intricate and elegant outcomes. What they're trying to do is have again very, very, very crude broad strokes. It's sledgehammer politics. It's like, you know, this is the problem here. Let's whack on that. You know, and a lot of stuff gets damaged along the way.
Yeah.
But this is again also about, you know, there's an idea where you try to serve the 80% or the larger majority, and this is the thing that intellectually is challenging, right? Because to make room for the least of us, you actually have to make a lot more room. It's not just as simple as we treat you the same. It's not everything. To give someone equity, you actually have to treat them better than the same, right? So that's something that does happen when you're trying to do something like this, when you're trying to serve more people down the middle. Like one of the big things that they're trying to do right now, and it's whether or not they actually pay off on it is one thing, but all the savings that they say that they're coming up with, they want to return to the American people with a check, right? I mean, it's sleight of cash, right? I mean, you're trying to move things around, financial sleights, but it's also something that you think about. Okay, so if this is the big thing that they're trying to do, how would they try and do it? So it's inelegant. They've got people without the experience, without the kind of finesse to run these things. They've got these young people who have no sense of great
History.
consequence, you know, and history, and a regard for history. Actually, you might, you know, the I think one of the great things that I've learned recently is that you know, for a lot of people, it's so what, right? Because there's a bunch of us who go like say you can't do this, you shouldn't do this, and the question that often happens is people say why, and there's no answer to it. There really is no answer that they have access to. So given the circumstances that they have, this moment, this leader, this circumstance, it seems to make sense. So I'm, you know, as I said, I've it's been a while since I've gone into the MAGA chat rooms. But the last visit I had there, a lot of the stuff actually makes sense. I've actually been watching Donald Trump's press conferences in the Oval Office. Those sessions, the whole session, and I'm seeing what makes sense. And in the midst of all that, in the great mix of thing, it's like the dad who's got a great idea, you know, for this, that, and the other, and he's still going to do some stuff which is objectionable, right? But in the context of it, because of the kind of communication that used to happen, for instance, where a lot of stuff was done but no one knew it was happening. Right now, every single thing is a major thing, right? I'm doing this, that's a big thing. I'm doing this, that's a big thing. That communication actually is bringing people on board. So you know, for a bunch of people whose lives from day to day was not great, it was terrible, and without much, you know, you had not much of a direction anyway. Now it looks like someone's going somewhere, and maybe you're on the ride along with them.
Yeah, you know, Joe, I always appreciate your balanced opinion and looking at the possibility of the other side. But, you know, we've talked about Curtis Yarvin before and the Butterfly Revolution, and their, you know, their goal for those techno cities where everyone, there's a CEO who's like the president, and they all sort of interconnect and it's all tech related and everyone has to agree. Part of that, and I don't know if you remember, he said that the poor people will be the biofuels for those cities. Do you remember when we talked about it? It was way back in January. That's what I see in this conversation and what's like.
Yeah. So
and the distraction, and I think it's really important. It's really hard to. There's so much news going on that you've got to work out what's the distraction and what's the actual real news. And I think a lot of people have trouble to navigate that. So that's what I'm always trying to do is like, what's really going on? There's a Democrat, Adam something. He's a fit kind of guy. Do you know who I'm talking about? He's like, no, that's just a distraction. What's the real news? He's always, every time he's in a media interview, he's saying that. You know, even when he's the target, because he was one of the January 6 people that we're investigating, right? So yeah, but just I think we should be opening our eyes up to expect that it's a lot worse than what we think it is, rather than this is the problem I think we've got today. Everyone's still operating from the world that we were in before January the 20th, and we're not. We're in a new world. And we've got to work out what that world means very, very quickly so that we can be ready for it.
Well, the idea. Okay, so the challenge for me is this: when you look at things like the idea of using the poor for biofuel, right? We think, oh, that's a horrible, ethically, it's a horrible decision, a horrible idea. The thing about it is, it's also not a realistic idea in terms of what will actually happen, what can actually happen. For instance, if we're talking about, let's just do some blue sky thinking on their behalf there. If you want to have a society where you're being as efficient as possible and you're trying to get as much energy as possible, it is the least efficient way to get biofuel. You don't give people food so that they can consume the energy up. You use the energy directly. So, there's some metaphors and some ideas that are just they're horrific. They catch attention, and it makes everyone, again, a bit of a distraction, really, because you go like, okay, that's what they really mean. Not everything is as literal, but the other thing that I also want to say is like, not everything is put up as a distraction. A lot of it is actually what they're doing. It's just distracting. I think we should spend no time on saying this is supposed to be a distraction or this is not supposed to be a distraction. Everything is really happening, and the question is what you do with it. Like, we were talking earlier about these things, about the stories and histories of websites being taken off. They're being restored as well because of pushback, right? And that's the action that has to be taken as well. There has to be pushback. There has to be enough of a groundswell for people to know, like, okay, you know what, this is not right. That's not right. People know about it. And it's kind of like, it's unfortunately the reply that has to come is, again, equal action as well, and not at the pace that we're used to. Because one of the things that they always talk about is the traditional media is lazy because they hang on to 2-3 stories. They can only process 2 or 3 stories at the same time, and what happens is they generate so much action, so much news. I guess the reply has to come in a quicker way as well. It requires some work. It actually does need more pushback. It maybe requires us to use more AI to keep an eye on things. I hesitated because I knew how that feels for you. But,
no, but I just want to say the biofuel conversation to me isn't a literal interpretation. It's this is how they think of you. Like when you actually understand the designs of these cities of the future that they're planning, right? And who gets to be part of them, like Praxis. And you can go to Praxis and you can register and become a citizen of Praxis now in virtual. Greenland apparently is the target for Praxis, by the way. But who's not welcome, and what happens to them, right? That's so to me, that's
people living in Greenland now.
Well, yeah. Yeah. Although you'd want to keep them because they're predominantly the Inuit who will know how to sustain a city, right?
I thought Trump knew how to sustain a city better than everybody else, believe me.
Hey, your son knows how to turn a computer back on. That was the big story today. Technical genius, apparently.
Oh, shall we move on?
Yep. So would you boycott the US? So Robert Reich is asking everyone if they would boycott the US, not fly there, which will obviously impact the travel and tourism industry, and that will have ripple effects. When we moved to Thailand in 2017, we had to buy a car, and I said to my husband, "Buy whatever you want, just make sure it's red, and please don't buy an American car," because Trump was in power. He came home with a big red Ford. I was like, oh. Anyway, like I am actively shopping to avoid US products, knowing that it's going to impact Americans. That I don't want to do that, but I think this is a movement that will grow. What do you guys think? And I mean, personally, I think it would be dangerous for me to go there anyway. But what do you guys think? Would you do it?
Okay, well, so the idea of the boycott, I think it's always about punishing those who are not going to feel the punishment, right? So that's the issue for me with boycotts. With regards to flying in the US, it's no longer the gold standard for aviation safety. So you might be doing yourself a favor not flying to or around the US.
Steve.
Yeah, it was a nice car. Yeah. The whole FAA getting rid of the John. What about you?
Oh, I don't know if I would ever presume to take myself seriously enough to boycott anyone or anything and think that that would have an impact. I always feel with things like this that as soon as you start interfering outside of your own country and sphere of influence, you have to be very careful about looking at yourself. And I'll take you off in a bit of a direction here because we all live in Singapore and we're aware of what people say about Singapore sometimes. I think there was comments from, was it Richard Branson a while back, talking about capital punishment and then going off on one about human rights. And my only take on this was when people try and culturally sort of dictate and impose their ethics and morality upon you, you have to have a very close look at yourself. And my take there was, well, look, you're coming from a place where a woman can't walk home safely at night without fear of being attacked. You're coming from a place where your police service and your courts won't actually do anything about it when a person visiting your country, even on the richest street in your country, can probably expect to have their phone snatched off them violently. I consider those to be human rights, pretty fundamental, people's right to expect that you could be safe, that a woman can be safe, that you can have protection against illegality. So, that was my take on that. And I feel the same way about pretty much any attempt to impose your own values on somebody else. Who will be affected by it? That's a good point that one of you guys just made. Would it harm the wrong people if you try to do something like this? If you do have an issue with something, I'm sure there are better forums in which you can get out there and make your opinion heard. When I lived in England for 7 years, when I was working with the Premier League, one of my great joys in life was traveling to America, because I'd never, from Singapore, America always seemed so far away that it wasn't really reachable, not realistically. I always had a very limited holiday time because of the football calendar. I'd have a weekend here or there, or maybe a 6-day sort of stint. So we got into a habit when we could afford it of zipping across to California or Florida and enjoying it. Didn't mean that I endorsed anyone or anything. It just was something that I enjoyed doing. But I did notice when I went to California that there was an increasing number of homeless people, which would kind of put me off going there now, I think, which would be very, very sad for me. But no, I don't feel that I have to boycott anything American to make a point.
Tim?
Well, it's Lent, so I could boycott them until Easter. It's a bit. I would find myself being a little bit hypocritical. I could, because I'm using my iPhone. I'm invested in the U.S. stock market. Sadly, at the moment, I've got my fingers in a lot of American pies. I'd have to boycott my dad. So
boycott your dad. That's one of the lines of the show so far, by the way.
Yeah. Is he over there? Does he live there?
No. He was born in America. He became Australian when he was about 7. Well, no,
right, but he is American made then, right?
He made America. He came to Australia when he was 7. He became Australian when it looked like the communist push down into Malaysia during the late 60s was potentially meant that my mum and the kids would be sent to Australia and he'd be sent back to America if they needed to evacuate. So he became Australian so that they could all go to Australia at the same time. So
on a more flippant note, does that make him a Ford Holden?
A Ford Holden. Yeah. So he can't comment on that debate. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's an American who is asking us to boycott America. So first of all, that, and I think the Canadians started off really interestingly, where they were boycotting predominantly red state things like whiskies and stuff like that. So it's something I'm actively doing, because this isn't an anti-American stance. It's an anti-authoritarianism and everything that comes with that stance. That's what I'm. The largest democracy in the world is changing before our eyes, and the implications of that are absolutely horrific to me and all of us. But anyway, Tesla stock collapse, Joe.
Not much of a mystery to that right now. Well, I mean, look, it's about a combination of things coming together, right? So it's a bad press right now, the reputation of its CEO. But okay, let's talk about being fair about the stock, right? It is doing really well considering, but the category that it's in, actually, in terms of being a car brand in the first place. Its value is up 3 times of what it used to be. It's lost its value of the big climb it had recently. It's lost the luster of the overpricing in the last few months. But it's not down and out for the count. But they could lose it completely if they stay with Elon and Elon continues to do what he does, right? So right now, the main problem is that he is the majority shareholder there. But it does not make it impossible for the rest of them to come together and make a decision. So as a majority shareholder, he's got 17%. And if the rest of the owners can come together and push him out,
I think it's about 13%, isn't it?
Okay, it's in the teens, so
we can average.
It's not impossible.
If you like.
It's not impossible for a group to come together and push him out. The board is very much in favor of him, of course, but it's one of those things, right? I mean, if they come together to shove him out, that could be something they could work out. But the other thing that also is happening with Tesla is that it really hasn't made much of a change or much progress in the last few years. The big news of late was the Cybertruck, and that's a bit of a mess as well. So it's not fundamentally strong. I mean, a lot of things happened because of Tesla, but a lot of things also aren't quite happening because of Tesla. So Elon's deal making actually has been one of the things that has made Tesla what it is. I mean, all the exploitation of the environmental rules that allowed for the setting up of all the stations and the charging and all that kind of stuff that made the network possible. That's something that he did. So, back in the I wouldn't say pre-Kitterman, but before he went crazy. But
and he was an actual environmentalist, right?
I tell you what, I'll boycott Tesla because I wasn't going to buy one anyway.
That's easier, yeah. So there's some real issues that it faces, but at the same time, I think it's also a good thing to have a kind of a right size about it, because it's still worth even at today's prices, it's still worth 100 times its earning expectations, which is really outperforming the category. So as much as people look at it from its heights to now, and you go like, well, even at this terrible, everything is on fire, almost literally state, it's still worth 100 times future earnings.
Yeah.
it's technically it's not the it's not the crypto stock that you were holding 5 months ago or
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, but it's actually okay for anyone who joined it early enough.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's a really interesting one. David and Richard on Climate Courage, obviously both sit in the economic space, had some really interesting views on it. But Mark Carney is Canada's new Prime Minister. I think he's called an election. Does that ring a bell with anyone? Just like in the last sort of 24 hours. But anyway, he's a real climate change believer, right? And in his previous roles as the Governor of the Bank of England and the Governor of the Bank of Canada, and has basically said that the remaining reserves of oil, gas, and coal must be left in the ground unburned, because if they do, it's just going to create extreme overheating of the planet, right? And back in 2015, he did this warning. So what's going to be really interesting, I think, in this election cycle is how he continues with that message and gets elected or not, right? So it seems like it might be neck and neck. I don't know what your impressions are. I think he's come out strong. He's come out the way he deals with Trump, his economic background, I think, is important for the country right now. So I found that a really interesting one. Any quick observations?
They're looking at April 28.
Right. Okay. So it's confirmed,
it's an
right?
expected date. It hasn't. It's not confirmed yet. He's expected to call it.
Well, it'll be interesting just to see how he, because Canada's obviously a big fossil fuel producer, but it's also, it's deforestation, like it's whole timber industry. So there's some big industries in the country, but there's also big environmental problems in the country. So it'd be interesting to see.
It could be annexed by the US.
Well, there's that, yeah. But is he going to be the first leader that really gets up and starts to talk about it the way it needs to be talked about? Because historically, politicians never do, because it's not a winning strategy. Then again, we don't know if it's a winning strategy because no one's ever done it. So will he have the guts? I hope he does, because,
I think
that
sort of rhetoric would do well in an election.
Okay, well, I'll just say this, right? It's not fair to say that no one's spoken about it before. No one's spoken about it and won because of it. So that's I think
I don't agree. I don't think anyone spoke any election I've tracked. They've never spoken at the scale that it needs to be spoken at. It's a little side bluster. It's never at the core, ever, because it's never a top issue for the electorate.
Yeah. No, I'll give you that. But what I'm saying is that in terms of it's never big enough to overcome the other issues, right? So that's where I'll agree with you on that. So, but there have been parties who've been built entirely on that. There've been candidates who come out completely running on those, and it's not been enough to carry it across. And that's the whole thing about politics, right? It is a complex thing. It's never just one thing. You can't just solve one problem.
Did you say this guy was that former head of the Bank of England?
And the Bank of Canada, yeah.
Yeah, all right, I remember his name. Yeah, that seems like a pretty unlikely platform for this guy. Interesting, I'll look it up.
Yeah, so not from a political background, but obviously if you're governor of the Bank of England and the Bank of Canada, there's a political and a diplomatic role. He's interesting.
There's a real danger for America. It's surrounded by smart people, Mexico below and Canada above.
So information wars. So I wrote about information wars in one of my weekend reads sort of towards the end of last year, and someone I don't know, but on LinkedIn really challenged me for using the term war and information in the same sentence, because they thought it was overstating the fact. I don't think it was at all. I still don't think it is. I think we've been in an information war for more than a decade. Anyway, there's a group called Media Matters, and you may recall we presented an image similar to this late last year. And basically what it's talking about is the domination of the right-leaning influence versus the left. And it's, Joe, you'll be pleased to know it's finally getting some attention. There's a lot more people talking about it. This image, you'll see it's being shared a lot more. Joe Rogan's, like, there's Midas Touch has actually overtaken Joe Rogan, and they're a left-leaning influencer brand. But it's kind of interesting, right? So basically, if you look at the numbers, like the left is nearly 5 times less as far as the audience reaches versus the right. And a big part of, the US election and who won was down to this. What I'm always sort of what I think people are missing around this conversation. First of all, the media has practically lost its influence. More than 70% of Americans did not pay attention to the media before the last election. The amount of times there was a number where the amount of time Donald Trump was on podcasts versus Kamala was, what was it? 23.5 million versus Kamala was 6.4 million. Right, that's a big difference. And he was on the broadcasts, so like the Joe Rogan show and that sort of stuff, right? Every time I hear people talking about it, saying, "Oh, we've got to fix this. We've got to have more balance." If we're going to have more balance, a couple of things need to happen. The right-leaning podcasts get a lot more financial support. A lot. I mean, they get millions and millions and millions of dollars. The left do not, unless they miraculously get the numbers. So they don't get the support. The other thing is, it's a very aggressive place and a place to exist, and there's a lot of attacks on anyone who's coming in with a left-leaning perspective. But John, do you want to talk about it? Because I think
do we have to define just going back to what you said a moment ago? Do we have to actually redefine the term media? I mean, you said people didn't pay attention to the media, so you mean
mainstream media?
We would call the traditional media, right?
Yeah.
So we're not including podcasts and digital channels in the media these days. We're separating, are we?
No, so that's what's happened, right? So basically what they're working out is mainstream media has pretty much fallen off a cliff, and all the influence is existing in these not new, but these newer forms of media. So, they trust, Joe Rogan for their political, they trust him for his political view versus CNN.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I'm aware of that. What I find fascinating is that, from my point of view, because I don't come at it from any particular political angle, and I don't consume a whole lot of media, but because I watch sport, for example, the one I would use is I'm a big fan of UFC. I like the training that goes into it. I like the production around it. I love the video content that they use at the top of their shows. So I watch a lot of UFC. It was interesting over the last couple of years. Obviously, Joe Rogan's a part of that because he's actually a very good commentator, and he's good on. From my point of view, I like watch people who are good analysts of sport. I'm aware of his podcast, but I don't really ever get very far into it. If he interviews like a heavy metal musician that I like, I might listen to it, or if I find there's someone of interest, I might catch a clip of it on YouTube or something like that. But what I found very weird was when I noticed that. President Trump, or when he was even out of power, was turning up at these UFC events, and then I saw that Dana White, who's in charge of the UFC, suddenly started taking on this very sort of political role, and I'm sure you guys were across that all the time there, but for me, as just somebody outside looking in, I found that fascinating because I don't consume their content in a way that I would be affected politically in terms of my views or anything like that. I just found it somewhat weird that would be in that space. And when I look at that and I think to myself, well, if there's an inference that there's political interference going on, maybe in terms of elections, it's very interesting to me that it would be the sort of the right side of things, who I would always consider to be more Luddite, more sort of reactionary, less likely to influence, the nuanced media. In the old days of the press barons, I think, it was more obvious that you would see a political agenda coming through because you could influence people more obviously. I would have thought that the kind of people who consume the content that is now being used to get a right-wing agenda across, it just surprises me that they would use those vehicles. And it's actually a very clever move, as much as it might be disquieting to many of us. But it's just something that, honestly, my position on all of these is a kind of a media observer / insider. And I find this absolutely compelling and fascinating that that's the path that was taken. And that those are the actual, is Jordan Peterson, for example, to have him on the same thing as Joe Rogan or Russell Brand, there's something really disturbingly weird has happened in that space.
Yeah. Russell Brand in particular. Yeah. Because I want us to move on to adolescence next, because I think it's actually linked as far as the story goes. But Tim and Joe? Because obviously we sit in a tiny blue bubble somewhere in there, right? Predominantly.
Yeah, with the tiny red dot, a tiny blue dot. Yeah. This thing about influence, I think, like when you look at that, you see a market share. You actually learn about the market from that. So for me, when I was in radio, and whatever the ratings said, it told you something about the market. It actually told you about the audience. So it's not about the media itself. You can do whatever you want. If you're not effective, or you're not great at doing it, you're not going to get the traction. You're not going to connect. The game is about connection, right? So this whole thing about the balanced approach to things is, it's given the world we live in right now, it's not the way to go, right? So you need to figure out a way to connect with them. And I was just thinking about how it'd be interesting if the world would be a much better place if we could do politics and news and everything in a WWE format, and people realize that it's theater. It's still a show, right? So I have a lot of friends who watch WWE, and I go like, this is not real. And for them, that's not an issue, because they go like, yeah, I know it's not real. They realize it's not real, but they know the plot, right? They understand the story, who's this and who's that, whatever, and all that.
Do you remember the music video, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Two Tribes Go to War?
Well, no, but go ahead.
Go look it up.
No, it's going to be in my it's going to be in my head
now. That was
now.
two world leaders. That was, I can't remember, back then it would have been like Reagan against Brezhnev or something like that, and they stuck him in a wrestling ring. So have a look at that. That was right. A long way.
But the thing is, what we are actually stuck in right now in terms of politics, it is theater, right? I mean, even if you look at what happened, and pick any country you want, there is an obligation to the audience to conduct theater. The people need to feel good and the righteous and all those kind of things. It all comes along with politics. So the thing is, if only we had the kind of realization that it was theater, we can enjoy it as a piece of theater and go like, okay, that was a good episode, and it's not that big a deal. We'll just move on with the next thing. But unfortunately, what happens is we use WWE sort of tropes, and it almost now it's a real life situation right now. You're in a real life situation where you are in this camp or that camp, right? I think what was his name recently? That he used to be one of those hero guys. Has become a heel. The big news was that he became a heel. Like I can't recall the characters, but he's a guy who's been doing a lot of acting lately, right? So it's a big turn in the WWE world. But again, you go like, it's not a real thing. It's not a real big thing, but it's a story that people can follow.
Who? The Rock?
The other guy. It's a guy who's
John Cena.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that was John from Cena. Clinton.
John Cena?
Yeah, I like John Cena.
Yeah. So he's come out now as a bad guy. He's a recent new bad guy.
Okay.
Oh, in movies?
In WWE.
Okay. Well, he's maybe he needs to be the bad guy in all the movies now. In the future when he does that again.
He's got to get a little bit better at acting first.
Look, my comment on this one, I think, will lead nicely into John's piece on adolescence, I think. I think this whole influencer circle, I think there is a cultural distrust in authority and institutions, and I think the distrust in political authority has gone down into a distrust in institutions, and part of that means that there's a distrust in education, or there is a disdain toward education, and I think we're losing a lot of the value of education, and I think education is being replaced by influences in social media in a troubling way. Although you could argue that education was mass influencership through these institutions and sort of promoting a particular narrative, and in some instances it is, but I think we're losing that. And from a religious perspective, the removal of religious institution as a focus of people's lives has meant that there's gaps, and those gaps are being filled. And what are the gaps? The gaps are something to believe in. Is a big gap. Like, who do I believe in, and who do I believe? And so when we take away that religious framework, we leave a belief gap, and that belief gap can then be focused towards these influences as becoming these idols in some way, and these people to teach me, to tell me what to do. The other thing that religious institutions really did really well was community and relationships, and how community came together and was able to steer people in the right moral, ethical decision making. And people go, but look, everybody in, all these religious believers are corrupt or having affairs or getting divorced and everything else. And yeah, the religious institutions were a hospital for sick people to come to try and find that moral health. So I think belief is one, somebody to believe in. I think a sense of community, and what community is a sense of belonging. And I want to belong. And tribalism is about having to go through rites of passage to be able to belong, or to belong to a particular community. And once you perform that rite of passage, you then enforce that rite of passage for anybody else wanting to come in.
Yep.
And it perpetuates and if it's a negative rite for passage, which I think John will share a little bit later, then that's really problematic. And so again, the religious institution had that as well. And of course, teaching of morals and values has, and I mentioned it earlier in the show, about from a pluralistic postmodern society where everybody has their own right to define their own morals and values, we still need some sort of global morals and values to be able to operate as a community or as a culture or as a country, to be able to say we agree on these rules of the game of living, to be able to live in a safe way. Like John mentioned about not being able to walk along the streets of England, without getting attacked in some particular way late at night or whatever it was, is a trade-off. I mean, there's a trade-off where other countries will do things a little bit differently to be able to preserve the peace and safety of their people to a different degree. And then all of that ends up with belief, community, belonging, values and morals, or a structure of belief of living, then comes down to followership. And followership in the religious space was you were following a benevolent, moralistically perfect framework, while acknowledging that we're not that we're never going to be that ideal, but we aspire towards that. Throw that out. We're going to follow flawed people who have followership for one purpose, sadly, and one purpose only, which is monetization. Now some will argue, well, hang on, what about the church's monetization on this, or religious institutions' monetization of this and tithing and everything else? Well, fundamentally, that was to help the disenfranchised, the social. That was U.S. aid. The church was basically going out and helping all those people that were suffering. Now, not always. Sometimes the church were helping themselves to it, and building giant gold statues of them, and cathedrals, and selling indulgences and everything else. I get it, but what we see in the churches today is it's to go out and help those leaders guide morally, and to help the disenfranchised, and we're going out and helping those people now. But the followership, the monetization is in the influencer circles, seems to be to buy my new Ferrari to get more followers, because obviously what I say will make you richer. So I see it with my religious lens on, and I know Andrea, you appreciate that they're the glasses that I wear, yeah. But I see it from that perspective, and I see that when you discard a framework that has been working, flawed, yes, from a structural perspective in the way that humans run it, but has been working well to support moral standards to a degree. And yes, I could be flooded with a whole bunch of examples about how there's been moral failings, and I get it. But I think this influencership is leaving a gap in society, is filling the gap in society that exclusivistic thinking from religious sides is pushed out. And I think, I think if we can have, and I mean real proper religion, not the style that we see racking up political lobbying support in elections. I think that's not the religion I'm talking about. That's more political teamsmanship under the guise of that. But I think we see it from a monetization perspective. So they're operating, they're tweaking their algorithms to get more followers to monetize more. They're understanding what works. They realize that being very opinionated and certain of that opinion and being able to communicate that and challenge anyone against it and bully people down, or at least hold that particular thing, hold sway with people who are looking for a father figure in their lives when perhaps their own father figure has failed them, or looking for a mother figure in their lives when their mother figure has failed them, looking for adult guidance from the authorities that were in their lives that they have since distrusted or abandoned. And they're filling that with these people of their own choice. And they will cancel them if they don't serve them. And they'll go to the next one and they'll give their money to them. But there is a nasty side to that. As we've seen in religion, there's a nasty side on radicalization, but there's a nasty side from the influencership that I thought was a reasonable segue into adolescence.
I think that was a really interesting way of looking at it. And we don't normally talk about shows on TV other than at the end. But John wrote a really interesting post on LinkedIn about watching adolescence. I haven't had a chance to watch it yet because I'm trying to watch it with my boys together. But with one doing NS and the other one off at school and stuff, we just haven't had that time. And so I think all four of us just need to watch it separately and then sit down and talk about it. We've always talked to the boys about this stuff, and that's because I've always been on social media, right? So when they first started getting on social media, I'm like, that's fine, you can be on social media, but you have to be connected to me. And I don't watch everything they do. There's sometimes I'll be like, come on, that's not appropriate. But we've always talked about it. And then when the Andrew Tates of the world and the Jordan Petersons of the world started to sort of crop up, so my younger brother got a lot of benefit from Jordan Peterson when he went through a hard time. But then Jordan Peterson became a different person. And he helped my brother, so I tried not to be critical of him, but my female friends were like, how can you not be critical of him? I'm like, well, because he's helping, but then to me, he started to get worse. And then you got the whole Andrew. Well, yeah. And then, yeah, exactly. The whole Andrew Tate phenomenon, and one of the great things my boys said straight up, oh, he's awful. Like he just didn't speak to them at all. So, I think we've almost made it through, but but like Steve and I, when you think about it as a family, we're keeping a keen eye on it. We spend times with them. We have every meal together. Like we commit to these things, but not every family can do that.
Yep.
I think if I could
pace of life, right? So, John, handing it over to you.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think that was a wonderful segue, Tim, because the word that really came to my mind as you wound down was absenteeism, and that almost folds back onto what I said about those who lecture a place like Singapore about human rights, but don't actually look at their own backyard and haven't taken responsibility for problems that exist there. And with adolescence, and if anyone out there doesn't know what it is, it's the Netflix miniseries. It's a 4-part miniseries which deals with a crime committed. It's in Britain It's a murder that takes place, and it involves school age kids, and it plays into all this business about influence and toxic influence on young minds. And what's interesting, what really caught my wife and I's attention about that was, obviously we lived in the UK, as I said earlier, for a few years. After we left, one of our daughters stayed on to finish her education, first school and then university there. And you know, when you have a young daughter, hence my comments earlier on, you're very, she was in London as well, very mindful of crime statistics, and you keep an eye on things. And you know, we used to follow certain sites, and we used to keep an eye on what was going on. And we were quite horrified by the news. And there will be those in Britain who say don't exaggerate this, but I think, without sort of jumping all over it and being alarmist, you know, you just have to look at the stats and the stories yourself, and you know that there is a situation there. But I came to this from a position that was slightly different, in that because I've worked in sport, particularly football, for many years, I'm very friendly with a lot of managers, a lot of coaches, a lot of players. And one thing that started coming through to me about 15 years ago was when very respected managers who worked in the Premier League would say to me in confidence, or at least, you know, when we were just discussing things, you know, I've lost the ability to motivate these players because they're motivated by different things from when I was in the game. I thought I could look at a dressing room and realize that we all wanted to win stuff, but then I see the guys comparing watches or talking about cars or romantic sexual conquests, and I realized that they're motivated by very different things. So that was my first inkling that there was a problem here. Then you become aware of the sort of, you know, cultural background and the fact that a lot of the young men who were emerging into the sports space came without parental support, without strong family units, and they were affluent, which meant that there were people getting into the spaces trying to get hold of their money, basically by influencing them and leading them into certain lifestyle directions. So I came at it from that angle. But when you actually looked through Adolescence, the TV show, at what was happening in here, yes, it played into the Andrew Tates of this world and the and that whole business of the what do they call it, the manosphere or something like that, and that whole business, yeah, that whole sort of incel space, which we all became shockingly aware of, and we saw some crimes perpetrated. But what I found most terrifying about Adolescence, beyond just the sheer numbing, shocking, pivotal crime that is committed in it, was actually the scenes in, I think, probably the second of the 4 episodes, which take place in a school. And they are absolutely horrifying because they portray the school as a place populated by students, many of whom come from very diverse backgrounds, some of them quite new to the country, others a little bit more established in Britain, but pretty much all of them coming from very difficult family backgrounds where they don't have a great deal of stability or leadership or role models or anyone giving them any kind of guidance. So they then turn to teachers who, for the most part, look absolutely terrified at what they're confronted by, that they've come out of, in very many cases, teacher training into this real world, like a battlefield that is a modern day school. And you can see them just absolutely struggling to cope, just putting videos on and even literally leaving the classrooms at times because they can't cope with what's going on in front of them. So this was a terrifying vision of what is happening. And it plays around this business of a family that thought, maybe wrongly, that they were doing the right thing in keeping a kid off the streets, but instead that kid was then left alone in a bedroom with a laptop and with access to the internet, where that kid, who probably inherited certain traits that led to the crime, was then, radicalized. So anyway, a few plot spoilers in there. I'm sorry if that is the case, but from my point of view, it's a very timely message. It coincided with, as I said in my LinkedIn post, a speech which is known as the Dimbleby Lecture, given to the BBC by the now former England manager Gareth Southgate, who's a friend of mine from my days with the Premier League channel. Gareth was very successful in taking the England team, the senior men's team, to 2 European Championship finals and a semi-final in a World Cup. He previously worked with the under-21s, so he has a huge experience working with young men. And he gave this talk in which he spoke specifically about the fact that the men are lacking guidance, they're lacking responsible mentorship, very often lacking father figures, and as a result, these toxic influencers who are there just for commercial gain are stepping into the space and taking advantage of this. So it's a tremendously powerful piece of television. I think the Rotten Tomatoes, for only the 4th time in its history, gave it a perfect 10 out of 10.
Wow.
So that tells you why this is such a compelling piece of media. That's it. I'm literally just repeating what I said in my post, but I think it encapsulates a lot of what we've spoken about here. Now, I haven't been able to contribute in a lot of things that we've done in the course of this show today, but I feel that this has come to a point now where some of the strands that we've pulled at all come to this point.
Exactly. It's just like you look at all of the issues that we face. I think it all comes together, and Joe.
No, so the thing about adolescence for me as a TV show, this is one of the things that I think people will miss as you talk about it, because we talk about all the stuff that happens in the show and what have you. What's really good about this is that, despite sort of having some spoilers in a traditional sense, it isn't much of a spoiler because the show is still watchable if you know all this. And it's because of one very big thing, a big deal about this show is that the way it's produced. It's 4 single shots, 4 shows, and each show is a single shot, as in from start to finish is a single shot. What's significant about this is that actually that the art and the medium being used actually draws the attention to something that you might not want to stay with as a story. As in, like the way this story comes across, because I was watching it and I couldn't stop watching it, but I had to admit to my wife as I was watching it, I said, this bit's a bit boring, but it was because of the choice of doing something like this as in a story in a certain style. So it's an artistic expression. So you know how I've always said the artists are going to save the world, right? It's because of a storytelling, the way the storytelling has been done, that made it compelling, that allowed you to see things and witness things, so that you could feel like you were really there, and it became extremely real. It was great performances by everybody as well. No, it's nothing to be taken away from that. That's the kind of thing that needs to happen. So for me, why I do this show is because it's about this. You need to. We need to get better at communicating it and saying things so that the people get it, right? They get
very good
point,
Joe, because Stephen Graham who wrote as well as starring in this one, and there's a scene that I think you're right. What was fascinating was my gateway to this show was actually somebody, I think it was Jeremy Clarkson of all people, on social media putting a thing out going, how the heck did they do that shot at the end of episode 2? And that was my entry to it. They did a shot that was like basically a street level shot that transitioned into a drone and then came back down to street level. But there was one scene, it was when instead of focusing on something that was happening elsewhere in a room, the camera just stayed on the face of Stephen Graham, and he used his ability to emote to basically take us into this incredible space, and I think that's what makes this special. And you're absolutely right, Joe, to say that this show and anyone else who wants to make a point, whether it be via boycott or whatever it might be, I think artistic expression is a hugely significant way of doing this.
It's not just the boycott; it's the film and short and TikTok you make about the boycott.
Yeah.
But I want to go full circle, because to me this goes back to the very first story that you referenced about artificial intelligence and NVIDIA announcing what they were announcing, right? What are the social implications of this? And so to me this goes back to the 1970s, when things really started to speed up, and then there was a technical solution for this, a technical solution for that, and here we are, right? And to me, it's because we never stopped and said, is this a good idea? What are the pitfalls? Where could it go wrong? When it was going wrong, how do we address it now before it gets too late, right? So, teenage suicide, especially among young girls, has been going up because of Instagram. Kids on social media, they're having a really hard time. Bullying's gone up, all that sort of stuff. Our kids have never known our kids have never not known this stuff to exist, right? Especially yours, Tim, right?
Yep.
So, but we've never stopped, and we've never forced the companies who are creating this technology to change what they're doing because it's harming our societies. And I think so. To me, the bigger question is, when are we all going to wake up to say, mass consumption is destroying the planet that we live on? When are we all going to wake up and go, oh, wait a minute, I could be part of changing my behavior to stop that? Social media influencers, they just, there was a story about Malta, an island in Malta that's just, there's so much over tourism now. These stories are coming up all the time. The influencers go over somewhere with a camera. It's a unique environment. Everyone's like, well, it's good for the economy, and then there's 10,000 people walking through this beautiful environment every day and it gets destroyed. So how good for the economy is it? In the meantime, that place becomes reliant on the money that comes from the tourism. So it keeps going. But everyone who turns up there is disappointed because it's turned into a shithole because there's too many people there. So it's like one of the things I always talk to my boys about is consequences. When you make a decision, there's a consequence. Are you willing to accept the consequence? Then make the decision. We have not accepted the consequences of any of our decisions for decades, and now I think we're hitting a point. Like, we're not going to have time to talk about the global climate report, which is out for 2024. We're not going to have time to talk about that, but it's like we're at the point where it's like there's explosions everywhere across our society, whether it's environmental degradation, which is leading to tipping points, societal breakdown, which is leading to tipping points. The world's largest democracy has turned into an authoritarian dictatorship, potentially. We're kind of falling apart at the seams. So I actually see it as an opportunity, but we all have to go, what do we want
back to
instead?
Basics.
Well, this is where Rowan Atkinson comes out and says 37-0.
Nice.
But actually, a lot of what John was talking about and what you were talking about, actually, just after my segue, you mentioned some things, Andrea, that I thought was quite important, and then John's sharing brought together that as well. And if I was to sort of think about what you would boil a lot of this down to, it is about careful parenting, participative parenting, and effective stewardship.
And community. I think that was a big part of what you were talking about. It
Yeah.
has to be community, because
Yep.
until everyone's running, and you can't. The normal. What a privilege! I have dinner with my family every night. What a privilege!
So here's this.
Where it used to be normal when we all grew up, right? It's not normal anymore.
If it takes a village to raise a child, it takes an influencer to radicalize one.
Yeah, there's a quote.
Yeah.
I mean,
guys, I'm running out of time. I have a person in India about to talk to me about something. I'm
running out of bladder control.
Yeah. Absenteeism, I mentioned earlier on. I think somebody has to actually take responsibility, and I think stewardship is a very important point. Stewardship around the platforms, the tech, the AI, whatever it might be, the policies, the politicians. Stewardship, very, very important. Which means, again, somebody just has to really knuckle down, and it's not easy. A bit like parenting. Somebody has to knuckle down and do this. Take responsibility.
Yep, and we need to do it together.
But we all have to take responsibility. I think that's the point.
Andrea, should we do the what have you been watching?
Yeah.
We know what John's been
John,
watching.
if you've got time, I know we finished with what's sort of distracting you. But if you need to jump off, apart from adolescence, anything?
I think what's distracting me is all the stuff that you sent me this week in preparation for this. As I said, I'm pretty much removed from news and current affairs. So I've been looking at it, going, "Oh my God, is that happening? Wow, who did that? Wow, that's absolutely amazing."
I'm trying to convince Andrea that we should send out a coupon for BetterHelp along with all these briefs that we put out?
No, so yeah, that's what distracted me. But as ever, I was bombarding Joe with stuff. I'm very much engaged in fitness and active aging. That's a big thing for me. Taking responsibility for your life, for your health, and for your future, and that's something that I'm really passionate about at the moment. So I like applying that, and one of the reasons I do that is I'm a big believer that if you can take control of the very difficult process of trying to keep yourself strong and healthy, then you can pretty much take on anything in life. So that's what I'll leave you with.
All right, you're going to take Joe to the gym then?
Yeah,
why not?
I agree with John.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
John, we'll let you go. We know you're hanging on way past your
Appreciate
time. Thanks very much.
No, pleasure, guys. Thank you very much for having me.
All right. So, Tim, you've been in hospital getting your knee done.
Yeah, well, actually, exactly what John was just saying with regards to active aging and taking care of yourself a little bit. I resonate with that. I just wrote this idiotic post on Facebook. I don't know if you saw it. Oh, of course you saw it. I know you saw it.
Take him off the drugs.
having to hang up my boots. My football boots.
It really was quite a marvelous post, really.
Thank you.
Just to say something like, I don't think I can play soccer anymore. I'm getting too old and I've hurt my knee. No, it's paragraphs long.
Yeah, I did enjoy writing it. It was fun. I enjoyed it. It was a trip down memory lane with a slight twist towards over self-aggrandizement. It was
perfect.
Yeah, let's just say it's a revisionist history of my own footballing career.
Right.
But of course everything was true. But yeah, I had knee surgery last Thursday, a torn meniscus from, as I said in the post, 45 years of international football heroics. I don't know about international football heroics. I mean, I don't know if I said international, but certainly football.
You did. You did, representing Australia. Yeah,
I did represent Australia. That's right. And so yes, I've been hobbling around on crutches and commanding my wife and daughter about to get me things like glasses of water, which my wife has been very good about for 1 week. We'll see if she can last the next 5. And but my daughter was complaining almost immediately after doing the first thing very selflessly. The second one was met with some resistance, but she's doing well. So to be honest, that's been distracting me, as was a presentation I had to do yesterday about a clinical patient that I'd been meeting with, and I had to explain that to a board of people that were going through that assessment of somebody in a nursing home. But yeah. So other than that, I would love to sit down and watch. I'm on my mid-semester break and I haven't binged anything. Oh, I have binged one show called The Bureau of Magical Things, which is an Australian production that's aimed pretty much at my daughter. And don't write it down, Andrea. Don't worry about it.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
I do like magic.
Fairies
I'm a fantasy head.
Fairies and elves. I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it, but it's don't worry about it. I enjoy it.
I read I don't know, The Hobbit when I was about 12, so I've sort of been committed to that path ever since.
This is not that caliber at all.
Okay. All right.
But it's shot in Brisbane, which I quite liked.
Yeah.
All right. Had a bit of Bris Vegas happening.
Joe?
Well, I'm just going to repeat my recommendation for Paradise. The whole series is available now on Disney Plus. Very well written, super clever, and of course, adolescents. If you watch that, I mean, it's a masterpiece of production and performance. It's really, really well done. What else I've been doing is I follow a series from the UK which is a bit niche. It's called QI. So it's called QI is a series quite interesting, right? It's a panel show right now, currently hosted by Sandy Totsvig, and in the previous or earlier seasons it was Stephen Fry. So it's that kind of material. It's talking about misconceptions in the world and stuff like that. So it's really, really up my alley. And if you can find it, I guess is the challenge for you, is go and look out for it. It's a very cute sort of panel show, witty and full of sometimes bad dad jokes. And there is there's an accompanying podcast that you might enjoy as well. It's called No Such Thing as a Fish. And that's done by the people who actually write QI. So they call them the elves. So 4 of them do a podcast about facts, about their favorite facts of the week. It is usually non-political, but always fascinating in terms of things that were done and context and stuff like that. So you'll learn a lot about things you thought were true, and sometimes not.
I need to add one, Andrea and Joe. You reminded me of it, actually. And I did binge watch one thing, and that was so I ended up on BBC iPlayer at some point. By the way, where is QI? Where did you find that?
You probably, if you've got the iPlayer, you'll be able to get that. So you figured out the geolocation stuff, I'm sure.
Yes.
So which part of Birmingham do you live in, eh?
But it's called Goes Wrong Show. It's a few years old, but it's so funny, especially the first season.
Okay.
It's called the Goes Wrong Show, where they're doing a live theater production in front of a live audience in Crawley, and it's Play of the Week, and they're doing Play of the Week, and basically everything horribly goes wrong in the show. It's very funny. It's very funny. Yeah. First few episodes are very funny. Second season gets a bit tired and stretched, which is possibly why I don't see a third season there. But
that's
then
the problem with binging too. But don't you think that's the problem with binging? Sometimes you need a year's break between shows, right? Because it's
or a week or something, and you can go in and you can see it afresh again. But also perhaps their idea was expensive and quite limited in what they could. I mean, there's so much that they could do. But anyway, the first season is very, very funny, and the acting is very, very good.
They've evolved into full stage production. So there's one, I think, Murder Goes Wrong, and then there's one that's Magic Goes Wrong.
I've seen Peter Pan Goes Wrong.
Right. Yeah. But Peter Pan was I think it was a Christmas production. That was for Christmas. That was one of those BBC offerings for TV, right? But they've done full on theater shows. And the Magic Goes Wrong was interesting because they worked with Penn and Teller to create a show that is about a magic show, and it's remarkable because it's magic performed wrongly, but it's still magic.
Yes, and that's what's great about their production is that they've got to be very, very talented to pull off everything going so horribly wrong.
It's perfect mistiming.
Yep.
Okay, all right.
It's quite funny.
Well, I can't guarantee I'll watch any of it, but anyway.
If you can, Andrea, you would have a chuckle. You would definitely have a chuckle.
And I'm often looking for a chuckle. That's
and you can watch once every year too as well. It'll keep you going for years.
Yeah, right.
That's true.
It sounds like a good idea. So we obviously binge watched Drive to Survive, the new season. Tim, you must be due that, right? The Formula
Drive to Survive?
Yeah, the
F1. It's a documentary of F1.
Yeah, no, I haven't.
You've never watched it?
No.
Wow, it's a really good show.
Man.
I've seen some of the other productions they've done. They're doing a rugby one. Doesn't really capture me as much, but it's cool. It's although this last season they're a lot more bitchy, and I've seen some notification that they're going to try and sort of curb the swearing. Because this last season, they were swearing a lot more on the Netflix show than they normally do. But no, I mean, it's an interesting show. You know, I kind of look at what's the big Max, right? And like he's obviously on the spectrum in some form. Like I think he would just my personal opinion. He would have, he would fit into the place where there's no compassion. I mean, he's a machine, right? And I look at him and I'm like, so people like him should drive Formula One cars, but they shouldn't be prime ministers and presidents or heads of Doge, right?
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Yeah, and that's the problem. I think we've got too many of those sort of people not
Round pegs
necessarily
in square
following the
holes.
right path. Yeah, but no, Drive to Survive. I mean, I really enjoy it.
Okay.
I don't love Formula One, but to me, it's a
Compelling
bigger
what?
cultural story. And
I
just
think I
anything
think
that
that
focuses on people at their best, the best in the world. Anything that focuses, I don't
Yeah.
care what you do, you can play the tin whistle as far as I'm concerned. It's just
well, I think
people who
I
get
think in
their
real
best.
life, F1 had a challenging couple of last 2 years because of the again about the environment, right? It's been very
Yeah,
very
yeah,
hot.
yeah.
Drivers
Ah,
have been
right.
placed, So it's
George,
I think that everybody's been
what's his
really
name?
stressed.
George, what's his name? He's but anyone who watches the Formula One will know it. In the Singapore Grand Prix, he had major heat stroke, and I mean, you could see his face, right? And then they closed the door, and you could hear him vomiting, and he was in an ice bath. I mean, that's long-term organ damage for him down the track. So, I mean, it's really, really serious. And then, as the years go on, that's going to increase. So they're going to have body cooling suits. But also weather impacting the race courses, that's already started to happen. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was just gonna say that probably why it was a bit bitchier than usual.
Maybe, yeah.
They might have been looking for a different demographic, or noticing that swearing increased their likability of it's all this sort of
maybe the manosphere sort of attract them,
something like that might have happened. Yeah.
It's interesting to look at it that way.
I wouldn't be too surprised that I haven't watched something, Andrea, because I've just been so consumed. But hopefully my schedule from July 1 onwards will give me some time to sit down and watch a television show.
Nice.
Yeah.
You worked hard.
Yeah, thanks, love. I enjoyed today.
Yeah, it was good, nice and deep.
Yeah.
I like that. There's
right.
no one answer.
We're still live, by the way. You seem to wind down having a drink.
Yeah. We're going to say goodbye. I'm going to go and pick
Okay.
up my son from his national service. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
See everyone.
Have a good life, everybody.
Stay well.
Bye.